So our last speaker for this portion of the series is Jim Lasko. Jim is the founder and artistic co-director of Red Moon in Chicago, though he dresses like a San Francisco guy. He's going to speak to us today about how arts can animate public space, create connections, and engage communities.
Thank you. So it's true, I'm an artist and I don't really know much about the real estate game at all, so I find it a little bit presumptuous that I'm here, but I'm going to try to convince you, if my slides get up here eventually, that ephemera, these brief, fleeting moments, have tremendous power. And they have a power that can be, I believe, you have? No. That I believe you can utilize in your toolkit. I started making theater, and I achieved some success in doing that. We toured productions all around the world, in fact, and had some things happen off-Broadway. But I was very frustrated with the narrow band of the public that I was speaking to as a theater maker. My initial impulse to become a theater maker was really the Greek theater, the classic Greeks, and the way that theater was woven into the fabric, the cultural conversation. And so I began to, that's not me, I'm not doing that. So I began to figure out how I could make a practice that would bring the power of theater, the power of bringing people together through theater into public spaces. Here's the power of ephemera. I don't imagine many of you know this kind of generic Chinese plaza. Maybe you do, but most likely you don't. And yet when I show you this, you know exactly that plaza, and it has deep resonance and meaning to you, that plaza. That human intervention into that plaza makes Tiananmen Square still resonate for many of us some 26 years later, I believe. I don't imagine that this building has a lot of meaning to you, and yet when you find out that it's Columbine High School, you are hit in the gut with what that building means. These simple human interventions, psychotic or outrageously courageous, have redefined those public spaces. We talk a lot about placemaking. This is my really simple definition of what placemaking is. Space plus experience, human experience equals place. It's the human experience in these spaces that make them meaningful. So this is a shot of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and this commission, the architect that was commissioned to do this was after numerous contests and went through a number of different panels and was reviewed. The plans were reviewed by numerous different committees, and yet when this building went up, despite all of its successes, everyone, I think I can say with almost no qualification, was frustrated with the deadly plaza that sat in front of it. It was a museum that had the definition, the motto, fear no art, and yet the entryway was as intimidating and kind of austere and off-putting as you could possibly imagine. So I invented this show that inverted the entire museum, that put the audience in the plaza and put the art on the facade. And we watched this kind of giant projected graphic novel being coordinated into the windows of that facade. It was very simple, actually. We had a number of overhead projectors, the same overhead projectors that sit in a schoolroom, a first, second, third grade schoolroom, and their 36 performers manipulated tiny hand-illustrated acetate images on these overhead projectors to create a single seamless screen. At one point in the performance, the laboratory of this mad scientist blows up and sets ablaze. And it was at that point near the end of the show when the audience had kind of forgotten where they were. They had forgotten that they were seated in the middle of this plaza watching the show happen in a public space. And so at that time, we had the fire department turn on their sirens and take a trip around the block, so that and there was suddenly this awakening of the audience to remember where they were and with whom they were sitting and how they were sharing a public space together peaceably. And it was an incredible moment. And then the same thing happened when they came out for the curtain call. So from a plaza that was remarkably empty and problematically so, it was occupied by over 8,000 people over 2 weekends. This was a street on the west side of Chicago that had a number of homicides in a very short period of time. And so 3 months later, we mounted this ridiculous, totally ridiculous show there. It was built on the back of basically a push-me-pull-you of forklifts. So one fork in the front went up and down, and a fork in the back that went the opposite direction and went up and down. And both of them were sporting what looked like rooms that might have been yanked out of a local apartment building. And this ridiculous show, we drove into that city street and began to perform. And over the course of a single day, people began to come out of their apartment buildings and just enjoy being in their streets and establish, in fact, the sense of safety and community that makes safety in a place that had hitherto really been thought of as kind of unoccupiable. This was in the back of the Museum of Science and Industry in a largely neglected park that was unbelievably designed by Frederick Olmsted and the site of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. But it was a space that was in a pretty contested territory in Chicago, and the Jackson Park Lagoons had been neglected for years and years. And so we began to build this show, a kind of clown show on water about people, a community that chose not to leave their flooded home, but instead to stay to continue to occupy it. And yet, a week beforehand, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Nothing was funny about that show anymore. It was amazing to me to see how the situation provided a context that absolutely demanded that we change everything about the show. And so within a week, we responded by creating a kind of eulogy to New Orleans and to the survivors of Hurricane Katrina. And there's something about that responsiveness, about that fluidity, about the way that we can socially construct with clear objectives, ephemera, to address certain situations, social situations, to make a more vibrant, healthy, and whole city. And that's what we do at Red Moon. It's a little bit like, as I understand it, the revolution of Apple, right? Where Apple came in and figured out how to make an interface that made the power of the computer evident to the user. It made it possible for the user to suddenly feel the power of the computer, to be able to manipulate it and control it and enjoy it. And that's a little bit what we can do with ephemera to public space. And we do it in wild ways. This is an entirely manual operated crane, and dangling off the end of it there you see a grand piano and a lounge singer and a pianist playing songs and singing these beautiful torch songs. Off that same piano off that same arm, these are some aerial performers that performed. We did this on the museum in Toledo, the Toledo Museum of Art, and also shared that same crane arm with a number of community performers, so that there was an investment by an entire community in a show that they had never seen on an object that they had never participated in, but it dragged more than 10,000 people out to an event on the steps of the Toledo Museum of Art, which, if you've ever been, it's not what I would call a heavily trafficked area. I want to tell you about a particularly complicated endeavor that we undertook in Chicago 2 years ago, 2014. It was the Great Chicago Fire Festival, and this was commissioned by the city of Chicago to be a signature event, an event that would showcase Chicago's unique character, its unique history, and its unique neighborhood culture. So we gathered people together, and the kind of Trojan horse of all of this were these 3 houses that were going to float in the middle of the Chicago River and be ignited into a kind of a celebratory bonfire, and then they would reveal these hidden interior sculptures. Now this was, as I say, the kind of Trojan horse for the for the summer long of programming that preceded it. We'd been in the neighborhoods, we'd been collecting stories and photographs and images and leading creative projects with people of the residents of some of Chicago's worst neighborhoods on the south and west side. But we wanted to be able to get everybody down to the river and excited about seeing these houses burn. So you see here the parade as they're going past the Civic Opera building and the signs on them saying, "Watch me burn." And here they are in the middle of the river on the evening of the grand spectacle, the culminating event that featured all kinds of neighborhood programming, dancing by break dancers and singing by choirs, et cetera, et cetera. But the culminating moment arrived, and there were thousands, tens of thousands, over 40,000 people, they said, came out to see this great event. And unfortunately, the fires didn't light. And it was mortifying. It was horrible. So much had happened that was so great. But there had been a record cold, and there had been regulatory conditions that prescribed certain safety parameters around the igniting of those fires. There were fuel issues, there were electronic. It was a kind of perfect storm of events that led to that fire not igniting. But ephemera is powerful. It is resilient, and you're able to respond relatively cheaply for most of you in powerful ways. And so here, last weekend, literally, what was that, like Saturday? So 9 days ago, we had that house rebuilt. It was on Northerly Island. Tens of thousands of people came and gathered. We had breakdancing again, and you can see that people had gathered for that in mass numbers. We had all kinds of performances from the south and west side again, and we had people out in droves to see them. We had this exercise, you can see in the house back here, that it is made with the paper shingles right there, that people wrote what they wanted to overcome and what they wanted to celebrate. And we did that all over the city of Chicago with over 50,000 citizens of Chicago. And they wrote what they wanted to overcome, and they wrote what they wanted to celebrate. What they wanted to celebrate was their ticket into the evening. And what they wanted to overcome was stapled to the house that would then take flame and ignite. And this was people lining up for the privilege of tacking their shingle to the house. And that was the fire. And it was fantastic. And that was me, very excited that we were able to ignite that fire. And then we had an amazing gospel singer, Lynn Jordan, come out and sing from what we call the ladder machine. She sat on a perch and sang a beautiful Nina Simone rendition of, oh shoot, I just forgot the name of the song. Anyway, Good Morning? No, Next Morning, can't remember. She came out and she sang to everybody. And then we rebuilt the city symbolically. Zahner Architectural Metals helped us work with 20 different architects from throughout Chicago to design a kind of symbolic skyline out of steel and to re-erect the skyline of the city live in front of people. And those were the fireworks that then accompanied the event. What I think is that ephemera has a tremendous power to address social issues, architectural and formal issues that create the ability for people to congregate in public space, to enjoy one another. It can create safety. It can create community. It can energize and create community. And I'm sure that it can be deployed by many of you as you look to build better, healthier, more vibrant cities. Thank you.